Hello and welcome everyone to SQL Friday. This is SQL Friday number 49 and my guest and the star today is Erland Sommarskog. I think I read the first article from Erland, well, it was quite many years ago, and I was looking at trustworthy options and cross database queries and permissions and things like that. So that's one of the articles that Erland has written. There are not many articles on Erland's homepage, but the articles that are there are very thorough. So I am looking forward to a presentation with what I think will be a quite thorough walkthrough of error handling and transactions in SQL Server. Welcome here, Erland.
Thank you very much, Magnus. As a matter of fact, we will only touch the surface of this topic because if there would be a thorough, then we would have to spend a whole day at least. So anyway, okay, welcome. Yeah. So anyway, welcome to this session entitled "When Things Go Wrong: Error Handling in SQL Server." So, let's see. I also need to press the right button. That's the way. Yeah. So, my name is, yes, as Magnus said, my name is Erland Sommarskog. I live in Stockholm. And I've been MVP for SQL Server for many years. And yes, I do have a website, sommarskog.se, which I usually describe as a small collection of large articles. And the largest article of them all is entitled Orphan Transaction Handling in SQL Server. As a matter of fact, it's so large that it falls into 3 parts and 3 appendixes and covered, I think, a total 250 pages. Now you might say to yourself, wait a minute, this guy is completely crazy. You can't write 250 pages about something as trivial as error handling. No, I am not crazy. You will find out what is crazy during this session, so which has been called from, well, the most important parts of this series. And my email address is there, SQL.Sommarskog.se. So if there is any question that comes to you after this session, you're more than welcome to contact me. I'd like to point out that slides and scripts, they are available on my website, sommarskog.se/present. So if you want to look at this stuff later on the slides, you can just go there and download the things. So this is my agenda, and the focus is how to handle unexpected errors. You might say to yourself, which errors are not unexpected? Well, an anticipated error is when you perform an action and think, okay, if this fails, I'm going to employ plan B. But to talk about that, how to handle those, you first need to know the unexpected errors. And by then, my time has run out. So this is what I'm going to talk about. So first of all, I will look at what action does SQL Server take in case there is an error in your code. Then I will look at how is that modified if I apply this option, set exactly board on. Then I will, from the lessons learned from that, I will discuss how your code should react to an unexpected error. Then it's time to look at try catch in SQL Server, how that works, and how we should write catch blocks and why we should write them that way. I will talk a little bit about client-side error handling, and the finally last thing I will talk about is how to handle nested procedures and transactions, or maybe how not to handle them, so to speak. You will find out at the end. So SQL Server is running your code and finds out, oh, no, not again. Oh, he can never do anything right. I have to raise an error, SQL Server thinks. And now what happens next? Well, let's have a look at that. And I hope you can see Management Studio.
I see Management Studio, yes.
So, great. We have a script here, and the first thing I like to call out is that we have a number of Go here. Now, most of you people probably know what Go means, but sometimes I see people misunderstanding this. So I'd like to call that out. So Go, that is not an SQL statement. What happens when I press execute to run the entire script is that Management Studio will send these statements to SQL Server, wait for response, then send the next part, wait for response, etc. So that and send the whole thing in batches. And this is important to understand understand the results of the ramifications of the output we get later on. So the first batch, what it does is to, first turn on this no count so we don't get these one rows affected messages. Then I'm creating a test table with 3 columns, which of the ID column and the date column are mandatory, and XML column, which I only use in one place, is nullable. Then I create an inner procedure, which starts off saying that it's starts a transaction, and then there is an insert statement, which is perfectly normal. I'm trying inserting one row with an ID and a date column. The XML column, as I said, is nullable. Then there is another insert statement that tries to insert 3 rows, and we can tell something will go wrong here because in one of the rows, the date column is null, so that's an error. And the last insert statement there is also perfect and normal. And then there is a commit, and then there is a print that it's completed. Then there is also an outrest procedure, which just prints that it's starting, it calls the inner procedure, and then prints outrest be completed. Then I run the outer procedure, and the last batch, what it does is first to check is there in the data in the test table, and then it checks is there an open transaction, and if there is, it calls out after the test there is an active transaction, and then rolls back that transaction. If there is not an active transaction, it's more silent. It says no transaction is active after the test. So I would run this now, and before I do this, I'd like to think for yourself, what results, what outcome do you expect? How many rows do you think there will be in test.tbl when the script has completed? And remember, there can't be 5 because this one is wrong. But will there be 0 rows, 2 rows, 3 rows, 4 rows, 1 row? So I don't really set up a poll, but you can take your bets silently. So let's press execute. And before I switch to the other one, I will say if you thought 0, because transactions are supposed to be atomic, you have my full sympathy. However, there are 2 rows in the table. But let's take this from the beginning. Starting cannot insert the value null into column date column because, well, that was not permitted. The statement has been terminated. Inrest be completed, outrest be completed, and there are 2 rows in the table, 11 and 15. So what happened? Well, SQL Server, first of all, yes, transactions are supposed to be atomic, but SQL Server violates that rule when it comes to transactions. However, when it comes to statements, it obeys that rule. So we could try to insert 1 million rows, and there's one single null value, and SQL Server will say, no, not going to do this, row everything back. But in this error, SQL Server said, yeah, okay, that was an error, but everyone can have a bad day. I don't want to ruin the show, so it continues executing on the next statement. So therefore, we got 11 and 15 inserted into the table. Now, I'm going to change this, and there is another error. Now it says bad date, so this will result in a conversion error. We might think that, yeah, what's the difference? The results should be the same. But no, starting, conversion failed, and that's it, no completed, and no rows in the table. This time SQL Server said, oh, this is a very serious error, very, very serious. No, I will abort execution and roll back the transaction. Stop everything immediately. Although as humans, we might think, what's the difference? But anyway, we can try something more. So I'm going to comment out that one, and we're going to try to insert data into no such table. And of course, this will fail. And we're starting, and there's a whole slew of error messages. Starting, invalid object name, no such table. Transaction message 266, transaction count after execute indicates a mismatching number of begin and commit statements. Previous count 0, current count 1. Outrest be completed, and then we get that same message once more. 1 row in the table, and after the test, there's an active transaction. So this time, SQL Server said, this happened. SQL Server came to this statement and said, oh, what a bad procedure. It refers to a table that does not exist. I don't want to run this procedure anymore, and stops at the point of running that procedure. But then it says, everyone can have a bad day. I don't want to ruin the show, so it keeps on executing in the caller on the next statement. So, and the caller, of course, does not know about that transaction. So it does not roll back everything. So just imagine, let's say that this happens in a real application. So the user maybe they gets an error message, but well, then keeps on working, and that user is quite happy because we save states and everything is saved. He can see that data. His office mates getting more and more irritated because they will be blocked because all the logs he's taking because of his open transaction. But the user is happy until the end of the day when he closes his laptop, goes home, and then in the evening he's going to check that something's up. And what? All my data is gone because now when he closed his laptop, well, everything was rolled back. This is known as an orphan transaction. It's really, really nasty. And what they were smoking the day they came up with this design, I don't know, and I'm not sure. I don't want to know, but it cannot be good. It's probably not legal. Let's see. Let's go back and we can try more things. We're going to do this, let's restore that one, and we're going to try the semicolon throw statement. Well, this statement permits you to raise a user-defined error. You are given error number, an error message, and also state. So let's run this and starting. I'm throwing an error. 1 row of the table. After the test, there's an active transaction. So this time SQL Server, like with a bad date, also aborted execution, stopped execution at the point of the error. However, it did not roll back the transaction. So again, we got this nasty orphan transaction. And in this case, I don't think we're smoking anything with this design. I have inside information. It might be frozen margaritas. Anyway, we have raise error, which, well, it's just the same thing as throw. It's also raising user-defined error, just a different syntax. I can give raise error, an error message, also severity level, and also state. So I'm going to run this, and we might think this should be expected to behave the same. But no, starting, I'm raising an error, completed, 4 rows in the table. So this time execution continues. And the fact there are 4 rows in the table is not strange because both these bad rows have commented out. So this statement is not perfectly good. So you see, there is quite some variation. Then I got this update statement here, and you will have to believe me, I can show this in full, but you will have to believe me, there's nothing, from a user perspective, there is nothing wrong with this statement. This is perfectly okay. However, there is a problem when I run it nevertheless. Starting, you'll get all this description. Should never happen. Oops. A system assertion check has failed. Check the SQL Server error log for details, and then this message goes on long out to the right. I'm not going to show you. Message 596 cannot continue execution because the session is in the kill state. And notice here, level 20, level 21, and message 0, level 20. A severe error occurred on the current command. The results, if any, should be discarded. So, as I said, there is nothing wrong with my statement. However, there is a bug in SQL Server, or I should say was a bug. I'm running a very old build for the purpose of being able to show this kind of error. So what happens is that they arrive at this line in the code, this file, and say, if we come here, we have messed up. We no longer know what we're doing. So they do the only right thing. They cut the connection because they cannot guarantee anything if we could continue. So when you see level 20 or higher, that will always be the end of your session. That will always kill you. And this is the assertion message. This is just a general message telling you that you have been killed. Now this message here, message 0, that is not a message from SQL Server. I think the lowest error number that SQL Server can produce is 21. No, this is a message from Management Studio, or more exactly, I think the client API. Management Studio realizes that, oh, wait a minute, the connection, what happened? It disappeared. So it produces this message to inform you that, oh, wait a minute, something went wrong. And sometimes, depending on timing, this might be the only message you see in this case. You might not always see this. But if you see this, then you know it was an error in SQL Server. If it's level 20, sometimes the level is it's level 11. And in that case, I think the error is actually in the client API, which could be that SQL Server actually sent up garbage. So let's see, we have one more thing I'd like to show you. So I'm going to here press wait for 1 minute. This might seem interesting. So I think I'm going to talk about the weather for 5 minutes or 1 minute. But let's see now, something has completed. Execution timeout expired. The timeout elapsed prior to the completion of the command, or the server is not responding. 1 row in the table. After the test, there's an active transaction. So wait a minute, I told it to wait for 1 minute. So why does it give up just after a few seconds? Now wait, look here, it's message -2. This again is not an error message from SQL Server. This is a message from the client API. So I've done this. Wait, that was the wrong button. No, oh wait, sorry, I'm clicking things in the wrong order. So now I should do zoom it. So I've done this. I've set up an execution timeout of 5 seconds. So I'm telling Management Studio, if the query takes more than 5 seconds, stop running it. Now, this might seem like a very odd thing to do, and indeed it is. I only do this for the purpose of the demo. Normally, Management Studio waits forever. However, if you write an application, most client APIs apply a default timeout of 30 seconds. So it's not unlikely if you just write an application in .NET and you don't think about it and you have a long-run install procedure, you will get this error. And then some people think that the SQL Server times out, but it's the client API. However, when this happens, the client API sends a so-called attention signal to SQL Server. And this tells SQL Server, stop doing what you're doing, and SQL Server will obey by rolling back the current statement. However, the active transaction will be left open. Now, there's one more way you can produce that attention signal. So I'm going to press execute, and then I'm going to press this red button. And you see, starting query was cancelled by user. And then I'm going to run the final batch. And again, there is an active transaction. And that red button has the same effect as the attention signal. So it's basically a human timeout rather than the automatic timeout. So let's now go back and do this for a second round. And let's see, let's remove that one. Oops. And go to the top and activate this line, which is set exec abort on. This one changes the rules. So I'm going to do this again for the not null error. Now I'm going to try this. Starting, cannot insert the value null. No rows in the table and no rows transactions active after the test. Because when this setting is on, well, then this error will abort the execution and roll back the transaction. We can try the bad date again. And not surprising, we get the same behavior as before. Well, let's see, we can try the no such table. And again, starting, invalid object name, no such table, and no completed, and no rows in the table. And no transaction is active after the test. So we get a more consistent behavior, it seems, with this one. Well, let's try semicolon throw as well. And oops, sorry about that. I forgot to uncomment that one on testable. And again, we get the same behavior. So it seems we get a more quite consistent behavior with set exec abort on. But maybe not in full, because raise error, no, starting, and raising an error, completed, and 4 rows in the table. So raise error does not care about exec abort on, but at least more consistent, if not entirely consistent. I'm not going to redo the update, but I'm going to redo the wait for thing, because this also changes a little bit. So you're going to wait for 5 seconds, and now you see when exec abort is on, and SQL Server gets this attention signal, SQL Server also rolls back the transaction. So we get at least nicer behavior. We don't get these orphan transactions just because we get an error. We can still get orphan transactions because maybe we have, in the procedure, we have just begin transaction and forgot to add a commit. But at least not because of poor error handling. Let's go back to the slides and summarize these things. So what action can SQL Server take? Well, and this is the default when exec abort is off. Well, the most severe thing it can do is to close the connection. Then it can abort the batch and roll back the transaction. That's the next most severe. And it can abort the batch without rolling back. It can abort the current scope and continue in the caller. And it can roll back the current statement and continue on the next one. So when does all these different behaviors occur? Well, this one is the simplest one. Close the connections. Those are internal errors in SQL Server. There's one way you can do this yourself, and that is to raise error level 20 to commit suicide, which might be good for pranks and nothing else. But apart from that, no use errors can really have this consequence. As it turns out, this group, aborting the batch and continue the call, is quite well defined. These are always compilation errors at runtime. Now, this might seem like a weird thing, compilation error at runtime. But you may know that SQL Server has this, well, called deferred name resolution that I personally don't like. But nevertheless, if you create a procedure that refers to a non-existing table, or rather there's a query in that procedure that does not refer to a table. If there is a query in that procedure that refers to a table that does not exist, SQL Server will not fuss about that one. So it will just simply skip that query more or less entirely. And the same thing, when you start a procedure, SQL Server is going to build a plan. It's going to say, oh, maybe that table will exist when we arrive to that statement. And as a matter of fact, that is quite true if it is a temp table created in the same procedure. However, if so when it reaches that statement, SQL Server tries to compile it again. And now if it fails, that error comes up to the surface. And this is a compilation error at runtime. And they have this effect. The scope is aborted and execution continues in the caller. We have this group, which is fairly small. They was introduced with SQL 2012 with this semicolon throw statement. They also introduced this feature execute with result sets, which also the errors around that one has the same behavior. I know there's some errors in Hackathon that introduced SQL 2014 that behaves this way. Then I haven't noticed anyone since then, but might be mainly running with exec abort on that I haven't seen them. But so it's a fairly small group. And then we have these two. aborting the batch, rolling back the transaction, and rolling back the statement and continue the next. Well, there are a couple of ones that are in this group which has to be there, like a deadlocks running out of disk space, for example, where it's completely meaningless to continue. But apart from that, it's like they'd be rolling a dice. Okay, we roll the dice, and if it's an odd number, well, then it's going to roll back the statement and continue the next. If it's an even number, it's going to abort the batch and roll back the transaction. It's completely unpredictable. Well, a certain error always have the same behavior, given the same settings. Yes, there are errors that have different outcome depending on set options other than exact abort off. Exact abort, yes, it's true. But it's very inconsistent. It's very hard to guess in advance. It's complete mess. Now, the good news is if you turn on exact abort on, we get a more consistent behavior because now we only have closed the connection, abort the batch, and roll back the transaction. And yes, the category 6, ignore exact abort on. Thankfully, that is a fairly small group of errors. So race error is one of them. Error tuner 66 that you saw, this trend count mismatch, is one of them. One category you should know about is syntax error. So if you build dynamic SQL and you get a syntax error in your dynamic SQL, the script is not going to abort even if you have exact abort on because of that. And then there is a few more, but they're not extremely important. Most errors will respect exact abort on. Yep. Then we talk about attention signals. So they tell SQL Server to abandon execution and occurs with the client-side error, timeout expired, and also when you press that red button in Management Studio. And also all APIs provides you an API call to cancel the transaction explicitly. And the current statement will always be rolled back, but the transaction will only roll back if exact abort is on. Now, after I've seen this, let's now discuss more generally, how should we handle unexpected errors in our code? Well, the first thing is this. We should always display an error message to the user. The user must be informed that things went wrong. Let's just imagine this, that we get some error, but we display some partial data. The user sees this and think, oh, the company is doing great. We can do acquisitions and goes on very aggressive on the market, when in fact it was time to maybe keep things down quite a little bit, maybe do some small cuts. And so the company goes bust and you lose your job. That's not good. Now, you may not want to show that ugly error message from SQL Server because the user will just be confused, and it's perfectly okay to display a generic error message to the user. And log that really message somewhere, but never lose it. Make sure that you have the error message somewhere, because if you only know, there was an error, completes contact administrator, and that's all you know, you're lost of trying to find out what went wrong. And always roll back any open transaction, because else, if you don't do that, you might go and persist incorrect or incomplete data, which of course again can lead to incorrect business decisions. And again, you can lose your job. And you want to avoid these orphan transactions. They are nasty. I say this because I've endured them, and it was horrible. I mean, you get logs everywhere. It's just a complete big mess. And also, abort execution, you have lost control, so you cannot continue. And this, I would like to just to make a little small diversion. This depends a little bit on the context. If you're writing a UI application, and well, you call us the procedure, that one raises an error. You should be prepared for that. You should not crash the UI because the procedure fails. I've seen this. I've hated it. But of course, in a UI, you can just clear the input, get back to a known state. But there is no way you can do this in a store procedure. Well, unless very exceptional cases. So you should really just stop executing. Just try to continue, because you no longer know what you're doing. Keep in mind, this was an unexpected error. And keep this also in mind, if you have exact abort off, which is the default, there is no guarantee that execution will be aborted in case of an error. So therefore, I recommend you to always put this statement on the top of your procedures. Set exact abort, no count on. So you get this more consistent behavior of error handling. So at least most errors will abort execution. No count has nothing to do with error handling, but it's generally considered best practice anyway to reduce noise in the wire. And you can do this in one single statement, so make the more sort of reduce the noise in the code. And as I told you, execution will be aborted for most errors, but this is not, and well, this can be okay for simple scripts which you can monitor, that you maybe run manually and look at, okay, yeah, this happened, okay, I know it needs rollback here. But if you do this in application code, no, this is not good enough. You also need try catch, and that is what we're going to look at right now. So try catch, this concept exists in many languages. So if there is an error in the try block, well, execution will jump to the catch block. Now let's look how that works in SQL Server. So again, I got my same test table. My inner procedure now has begin try, but it says start a transaction, the same insert statement, the same bad insert statement here, the same one again, commit transaction, inner SP completed without error, and I got my catch block, inner SP raised error, and the text of the error message, commit transaction. That's a very odd thing to do in the catch block. Normally you would never do that, but I'm doing this to explore what's going to happen with different errors. Print NRSP exiting catch handler. This time I'm mainly going to run the inner procedure and also going to print after NRSP. But I also have my outer procedure and says begin try, outer SP starting, run NRSP, and outer SP completed without incidents if we would happen to arrive here, and try begin catch, and the same kind of catch handler again with a commit. And then we have the same diagnostic thing at the end. And I'm going to run this for the not null error. And starting, raise an error, cannot insert the value null. Exiting catch handler after NSP, one row in the table and no active transaction. There's nothing strange here with one row in the table because we actually actively did commit the transaction in the catch block. But let's now try this for the bad date. I know we get a bunch of error messages. Starting, raised error, conversion failed when converting the date on time, etc. Message 3930, the current transaction cannot be committed. It cannot support operations that write to the log file. Roll back the transaction. Inner SP exiting catch handler. Message 266, again, transaction count after execute indicates a mismatch in number of begin and commit. Previous count 0, current count 1. And after NSP, message 3998, uncommittable transaction is a uncommittable transaction is detected at the end of the batch. The transaction is rolled back. Oh, well. So what happened this time? Well, this error would not be in court, would have rolled back the transaction and aborted the batch. And because of this, the transaction is, as the terminology is, doomed. And doomed means exactly this. When the transaction is doomed, you cannot commit it, nor can you perform any more operations in it. There's only one thing you can do with it, roll it back. So you might think here that it would be logical if this message also had rolled back the transaction and aborted the batch. No, but SQL Server wants us to hold the axe ourselves. So execution continues in the next statement. So we get this trunk out mismatch because we never committed. But then eventually, though, when we are all still exiting the batch without rolling back the transaction, SQL Server realizes that it has to grind the axe itself and rolls back so we don't get a mess with an orphan doomed transaction. That would only be bad. So let's see, we could try this for semicolon throw. And starting, I'm throwing an error, exiting catch handler, one row in the table, so we can commit the row, nothing wrong happened there. And let's try brace error then. Well, the same behavior. So we could catch the error, do a commit if we know for some reason want to do that. Well, maybe when we want to apply some plan B or do some other operation. Now let's see, this was the internal error. Can we catch this one? No, we can't. We get the same output as before. And this makes sense because they have lost control. We should not be able to catch this. We should not be able to continue. This is exactly in line with what I told you before. Stop execution because you no longer know what you're doing. So this is okay. Let's see. Can we catch this execution timeout? Let's try that. Let's see what happens. No, we could not. We get the same behavior as before. Starting execute timeout expired, one third table, and after the test, there's an active transaction. And this is not very strange because we are down here in SQL Server, and this error occurs up here on the client. It would be quite fun if we could catch that error. And also, this intention signal, no, we cannot catch that one, which, yeah, sometimes you might want to do that. Then again, it's quite a good thing because the client has told us, stop, I'm not interested anymore. Stop doing what you're doing. So that is so to speak by design. And oh, I didn't do the no such table. Well, let's do the no such table then. Let's see what happens now then. Okay, starting invalid object name no such table, transaction count after execute indicates a mismatch in number of etc. etc. After NSP, one row on the table, after test there is an active transaction, and no sign of the catch block. So does this mean we cannot catch this type of errors? Yes and no. Let's see, we're going to comment out these guys. and run the outer procedure instead. And now you can see starting, raised an error, invalid object name, no such table. Out SP or 8 exiting catch handler, 1 row in the table, and now transaction active after the test. So the story is this: with these compilation errors at runtime, you cannot catch them in the scope they occur, but you can catch them in outer scopes. And yeah, we're going to come back to this about this. Yeah, when I do the slides, I think. So let's now go back and do a second round with execute board on. So it's going to activate this row and this one and comment out this one and up to the top and do execute board on and see how things behave now. So, and this, sorry, I should show you, make it clear, I'm running now with a not null error. Execute board is on, starting, raised an error, and then again, we get this message 3930, the current transaction cannot be committed and cannot support operations that write to the log file, roll back the transaction. Because now, since execute board is on, had the error not been caught, the transaction would have been rolled back. And also because execute board is on, we don't get the other messages because now this error also rolls back the transaction. And if we try the date, well, we get the same output. So, well, we can go and try a semicolon throw. Not surprising we get the same error. Because execute board is on, the transaction would have been rolled back, so the transaction is doomed. Well, then we might think, what raise error then? Raise error does not care about execute board on, so I guess now we can commit. Nope. Turns out that when execute board is on, the transaction is always doomed. So, when you arrive into the cache box, the transaction may be doomed and must be rolled back. And errors that roll back the transactions, well, without the cache box, those are the dooming errors. And of course, if you get a deadlock running out of disk space, it's perfectly okay. I mean, there's no reason to continue in that case. If you have a deadlock, you must be rolled back so the other process in the deadlock can move on. And if you run out of disk space, well, it's game over. But for a conversion error, well, I mean, maybe you want to employ a plan B. Maybe you only want to log that error into a table somewhere and move on with the next row or whatever you're doing. But this is just the way things are. And keep this in mind, that if you have execute board on, the transaction is always doomed. And you cannot catch all errors. So you cannot catch the internal errors that close the connection. And that's, I would say, is perfectly okay. Nor can you catch compilation errors in the scope they occur, but you can catch them in outer scopes. But of course, you may not always have an outer scope if you're calling procedure directly from the client. And yes, so let's see. When I first wrote about this, I found that was already a bug report, and then Microsoft closed that one as I think won't fix. I submitted a new bug report on the Connect, and they closed that one as by design. What design? What is design about that? So anyway, that one also went away, and then they moved to this new feedback system. So here is place you can vote for. I'm not going to try to put this in the chat because I'm clicking on this. It's not going to work out well with the presentation. But if you download the things, you can go here and vote because I think this should be fixed. I mean, this is not unusual that you want to trap, for example, because it's not only that the table is missing. It could be, for example, you have a big query, and one down in the lower right corner, you have a temp table, and then you have some other error in that big query, like you misspelled the column name or an alias is missing. And SQL Server will not tell you until you come to that statement on runtime. I hate this. And then I did not show demos of this, but there's various sort of odd errors that you cannot catch, and they're more common with sort of fringe features like linked service or the CLR. Full text also have quite a use, where you get an error, but you cannot catch these. Lots of special stuff, and these are described in. That is a section, I think, in my article, or one of the series parts of the article, where I cover some of the odd things I've noticed. And you cannot catch attention signals. So let's now discuss how we should use try catch.
Can I ask you one question
sure.
regarding the conversion error? is it still so that there is a difference between conversion error to datetime and to datetime 2?
Oh, between datetime and datetime 2. Let me put it this: if you're converting an error date, a bad date, if it's just like here, it was a string, so it doesn't even resemble a date at all. So, for example, you only have 7 digits in your date, then it will abort the batch. But let's say you're trying to convert the it's 8 digits, but it's not a date, like 2040. Well, then you will get an arithmetic overflow, which will not abort the batch, but roll back the current statement. Datum and datum 2, I haven't paid attention, but
I think there is something in one of your articles where you describe that there is, if you get a conversion error for the same string that you're trying to convert to a date, it's going to depend on what data type the date is. So it's completely.
There's so many nasty details in that article. I don't even remember them myself. I will have to look that up, and I haven't checked whether it has changed, but I would not expect that they have changed, because after all, one reason they don't really like to go and change these things is that could break applications. That could be code that relies on a certain behavior. That they really need to clean this up. It would be lovely, but at the same time, as Microsoft care a lot about background compatibility. I remember I saw someone quite a few years ago. They apparently, when they moved to SQL 7, they changed the behavior for some arithmetic error, and well, eventually they did change it, I think. But for several service pack, they went on and said, no, this is by design. This shouldn't be this way. So the only reason they would change would be my mistake. And the good thing, if they change something by mistake and no one discovers it until later on, then they have both double problem. Oh, well. So anyway, so how to use try catch. So you should have try catch in almost all your subprocedures. And when I say almost in parentheses, is that the exceptions are very few. You will see one exception later on, but that will be of a very natural reasons. But sometimes you might want to have a procedure. No, I'm going to which is only a sub-procedure to another one. But basically, always do this. And keep this in mind. The try block is the main meat. This is where you have your business logic. And the catch block, is almost always in the same procedure. It's almost always the same. And again, almost in parentheses. Sometimes you might need extra cleanup in the catch block. For example, if you've started the cursor and you want to make sure that it's closed, you might need to do some extra steps in the catch block for that. Same thing if you work with application locks on session level. But most of the time, it's always the same in every procedure. And I mean, sometimes I see people, and yes, this is important, it should also be short and non-intrusive, and you only need 2 lines. Because sometimes I see people posting procedures where, well, the try block is this long and the catch block is this long. It doesn't make any sense. Because it's code that's being repeated everywhere, it should be short, simple, so you know that it's also not going to change and morph between procedures. And 2 lines is all you need. 1, to roll back to any open transaction, and re-raise the error. So why do you need to do this? Well, first of all, you need to roll back any open transaction to make sure that you don't go and persist incorrect data and to avoid these nasty orphan transactions. And re-raise the error, because an unexpected error must never be dropped on the floor. It must always float up somewhere, pass the bucket to the next guy on the call stack. So this guy is going to re-raise the error, and eventually it will float up to be displayed to the user, or if it's like an agent job, it's going to be logged somewhere. And of course, the agent job should mark as failed. But it must be very important to be told that something went wrong, because else things are good, right? And people make incorrect business decisions. Again, yes, you lose your job. Oh, that could happen. So now roll back any open transactions. Always your cache box should include this line. If at a track count greater than 0, roll back transaction. Always have put in this line. Now you may object, but I don't have a transaction in my procedure, so I shouldn't have it there. Yes, you don't have it today, but that could change tomorrow or 2 years later. Well, you have left the company and someone else is changing that procedure. Well, that person then remember, I've added a transaction. I need to extend the catch block. Don't count on that. Furthermore, there is a fairly odd, but there is a setting in SQL Server for implicit transactions. So when this setting is on, any DML statement, including select, will start a transaction. And while this setting sounds very, very odd for someone who's only worked with SQL Server, this is actually the default behavior or the mandated by ANSI. But there are some APIs or some things that could have the idea to set this on. So that's one more reason to put this in. Also, you may be calling a stop procedure, and that procedure starts its transaction but fails to commit or roll it back. And you have seen reasons why that can happen. For example, a compilation error at runtime. And in SQL Server, we always have to cover up for each other, because if the other one fails to do that. And then you may ask, but wait a minute, maybe I'm called from another procedure that has started transaction. Should I really roll back? Yes, you should, and we will talk about that one later on. So how can we re-raise the error? There's two ways to do that. We can use a custom procedure, or we can use a semicolon throw, and we're going to look at both. So here we have a custom procedure, and so I got my test TBL. This is now simplified. Don't have the XML column. I got my error handler SP, and yes, so this is a procedure that does not have begin try for obvious reasons. First of all, I start with just as the principle, set exit word command now count on. Then I collect in a number of variables all the information I can get about an error. I can get the error number, the severity, where 11 to 16 means, well, normal user error state, which is, well, Microsoft internal. But maybe we needed something someplace. So it's always good to have it. We have the procedure name, the line number, and the text of the message. Then I look at the text of the message. And if it doesn't start with 3 asterisks, I'm going to form a message that starts with 3 asterisks, which I will include the procedure name, the line number, the error number, and the text of the message. I don't include severity and state because I use raise error, and raise error accepts severity and state. Also note here, I don't put the error message here. I only put a placeholder here for percent string. This is because if the error message includes a percent character, well, things could go bad if I put it here. And because this one's just only the purpose of this procedure is to do raise error. That's why that's no try and catch. So I got my inner procedure. Now I put this line here, set exit word command now count on before begin try. And there is a point with that, because this is something that should be in every procedure. So there's no, and between begin try and end try, that's the main meat of the procedure. So it doesn't belong there, because then it's the only noise that is just disturbing your view. It should be here, so it's sort of taken out of the view. The only time you want to see this, you look at this, is when you're doing code review. And if it's missing, you're going to call that out. But this is just the part of the procedure. So starting, begin the transaction, inserting one line, and again, well, clean this up a little bit. Now it's a really silly error. It's 13% for the ID. In one more row, commit transaction. Now there's a proper catch block. If at a try count greater than 0, rollback transaction, and exit error handler SP. Begin catch, end catch. And now to procedure, the same thing here. Set exit word command now count on. Begin try, print out SP starting, call the inner SP, out SP starting, and the same catch block again. I'm going to run the inner SP, but I can also run the outer SP if I want to. We're going to try both. And here's the final select. So I'm going to run this. And I get this inner SP starting. So message 50,000. I cannot change that. When raise error, I will always get message number 50,000. But level 16 and state 1 is authentic from the original error message. Procedure error handler SP line 17. I can't change that. It will always be that. But here I have inner SP line 12. Error 245, conversion failed when converting the varchar value 30% to data type int. No rows in the table and no active transactions. And just for fun, let's do this with the alt SP. So now the error will be raised and caught twice. And you can see the output is the same. With some extra work, I could maybe add a trace. I could add some some kind of a trace back here, so I can see stack trace. I can see which procedure that I had, but I did not do this for this simple demo. Now, let's go back to this one. Now, there's one small problem, with this solution, and that is I'm doing raise error and execution continues on raise error. So let's say that this my inner procedure is called by another procedure which does not use try catch for some reason. Maybe it was written by, well, some very old fart who's been writing code since SQL 2000, or maybe it's just simply part of an old application that was written for SQL 2000, and they haven't come around to add try catch. So then to be really sure that the execution stops so we don't continue, we might want to use throw instead, semicolon throw. So we can do this. And now throw does not accept severity for the error message, so it's a parameter, but we can add that to the error number. So we're going to say the severity is 50, add 50,000 to the severity. So I can track that. The take the state, and just put in the error message because throw does not use placeholders like raise error. So I can do this, I think. I'll run this. Of course, that will be a syntax error because I've selected the error message. Let's try this again. Starting message 50,016 because of the severity from the original error message, but wait. Up, invisible ink. What's going on? Well, so throw does not accept placeholders like Razor does. However, it still reacts on them. So I need to, oops, I'm again pressing the wrong key here. I need to make sure that for this to work, I need to replace all percentage character with double percents. And now I get back the proper error message. Now, isn't this amazing? I think I've submitted a bug for this, but they haven't come around to fix this. Oh, well. Oh, well. But there's one more other problem here, though, with this one. We're going to look at this statement here. So you might see here, backup database master to disk K, no such disk. So when I run this on its own, I'm told that cannot open the backup device K, no such disk. Operating system error 3, the system cannot find the path specified. And then there is a companion error message 3013, backup database is terminating abnormally, just in case I didn't notice. There I get this extra message. Now what happens if I had got this with my error handler SP? Well, I get starting in 2016, in SP, message 3013, backup database is terminating abnormally. I only get this message. Well, it's not strange that I only get one message because I'm using scalar variables, so of course I can't get both messages. But unfortunately, I get in the second message, which does not tell me why the backup failed. So this is kind of a bummer. Then we have semicolon throw. We can also use this. So we're going to new script here, no error handler SP this time. We got the same thing down here until begin catch, end catch. If at a track count greater than 0, rollback transaction, and then semicolon throw. This form of throw without arguments can only be between begin catch and end catch, and it will re-raise the error. So I'm going to run this. And now you see, I get the error message just like it had been if it had been raised directly. So that's quite nice. Conversion failed. We converted the varchar value 13% to data type int. And thankfully, no problems with the percentage character here. So, and if I then try this backup message, this is also very nice. I get both error messages. So I can see why my backup failed. However, there's also some problems with semicolon throw. Yes, you might be wondering, why is it talking about that command as semicolon throw? So the story about semicolons in SQL Server is this. So in standard SQL, semicolon is mandatory. Every statement should end with semicolon. That's just part of the syntax. However, for legacy reasons, that is not compulsory in SQL Server. Well, way back then when Sybase designed this in the 80s, they thought, hey, semicolons, that's for wimps. So they did not even permit semicolons. Microsoft introduced them, but they did not make them mandatory. However, it's deprecated not to use them. But as you can see, well, yeah, being an old fart, no, I'm not very good at using semicolons. And maybe I should add them, for example, add one here. But if I do that, oh, incorrect syntax, semicolon. It's not always easy to figure out where you actually should have them or not. Anyway, you might say, but why not do it this way? Isn't this more sort of proper way of doing this? Yes, but you know, if you're fiddling around in editor, you're moving around here, and then you might just press a key by mistake and it's gone. That happens. But then you might say, so what? I mean, this is a syntax error. So what? Okay, let's try to run this and see what happens. And there's no error message at all. Starting, that's all. But no error message. What happened? Yep. Well, let's comment out this backup message. And at least now there is an error message, but not a very 6401 cannot rollback throw. No transactional save point of that name was found. What? Well, as it turns out, this is legal syntax. This means something, and what it means, we're going to return to that later on. So that's why I want you to think of this command as semicolon throw. Always write the semicolon there. And if you would see this when you're doing code reviews, take it away, you should get just as nervous if someone as if someone has put keys on the table, something like that, because this is very bad. I can tell you a story. An MVP colleague of mine, he told me he had devised a template for his programmers, which went something like this, with the semicolon there. And at some point, the semicolon disappeared. And there are a lot of store procedures that look like this, where the catch handler did nothing at all or produced this weird error message. So that's why I use a semicolon there. If you think this just looks too ugly for you, well, then you can actually do this and put the semicolon after rollback, because rollback throw alone is not legal syntax. Oh well. So we have two ways to re-raise the errors. And why would you do one or the other? Well, if you still are on SQL 2005 or 2008, you only have one choice, because semicolon throw was introduced in SQL 2012. But it could also be that you want to log the error, have some other custom behavior. So one application I've been worked with for many years, we did exactly that. Our catch handler will go and call us the procedure, and on the loopback connection, it will go and log that error to a table. So we always have it. Or, well, it will be a loopback connection if there is an open transaction. But it will make sure we always persist the error so we know that we can trace this later on. And it avoids the semicolon trap. But then again, semicolon throw also has its advantages. I mean, it's simple. You don't have to write an extra procedure. You just put it in. And all error messages are preserved as is. Also very nice. And, well, make sure the execution is aborted, because just like throw with arguments, semicolon throw will ensure that transaction will not continue. But as we saw, we can do that with a custom procedure as well. Now, we might ask this. Now, if I use try catch, do I really need exit abort on? And the answer is yes, because try catch does not catch all errors, so we can still trap them with exit abort on. And we have the attention signals that is timeout expired. They make sure that the transaction is rolled back. Now, let's talk about client-side error handling. So, and this will not be a lot, but that's two things I like to call out. First of all, if the client is making a call to SQL Server and finds out there was an error, it should always respond by submitting this line. If at a track count greater than 0, rollback transaction, with one exception, and that is if the client has started the transaction through its own transaction object, obviously it should then have used that object. Because the client should not rely on that the SQL code actually has exit abort on. Each component could do its job. And also the SQL code could still get an orphan transaction because, well, it was an error it couldn't catch, like a compilation error at runtime, or just simply begin transaction with no matching commit. But each component needs to do it. Each component needs to do its job. And in SQL Server, this includes cleaning up for others that maybe failed to do their job. And then there's one more thing I like to say. Make sure that you get all result sets. And I'm going to explain with a demo what I'm going to mean by that. And yes, we'll be looking at C# here. So here I got a select statement. And this select statement is designed to return a couple of rows and then raise an error, or then produce an error. And it's to see that there is a begin try, but I've commented that out for the moment. Then I got my main procedure. I'm creating a connection, a command, and I open my connection. And all I'm going to do is start and execute read. And all I do, I'm counting the rows. And then I'm thinking, hey, I know that my query only produces one single result set, so I'm not going to do next result. I don't want to type that. That just is too much work for me. So then I'm going to print out, if everything goes fine, how many rows are produced. I also got a catch handler, and yes, I'm first submitting then if at a track count greater than 0, rollback transaction. And then I'm print out the error message. So let's compile and run this to see what it produces. I get invalid floating point error. A valid floating point operation occurred. And the reason I get that error is because eventually this select will return come to a max column where max length is -1. Now let's activate this try catch. Of course, this is a very odd thing to do. You would never submit something like this. A single select to begin try catch doesn't make any sense. But just imagine that instead my batch would be a store procedure. So the try catch would be inside that store procedure. And let's say that that store procedure would in fact be lots of statement, then do a final select at the end. Now let's compile and run this. And it says 60 rows are read and no trace of an error. Why does this happen? Well, previously, the error was raised as part of the select statement. Now that error was trapped, so the rows were returned, but now because it comes from a different statement. The way the TDS stack works, SQL Server will now say that this is the next result. So I need to do this. You should always do this, even when you do an execute reader. Go on a loop over next results, because now, if I do this, the error message is back in town. But what could have happened, let's say that this would have been a read application, and the user sees all this data and thinks, oh, we're doing really great. Or rather, the other way, we're doing really bad. Oh, we need to make some cuts. Oh, we're going to outsource the IT department, and you lose your job. But in fact, that next value was so big that it caused an overflow. And if I'd seen that value, woohoo, bonus for everyone this year. Oh, yes, so it's very important to make sure that the users understand that things went wrong. So I'm going to talk this from a .NET perspective. With execute reader, always use next result set to get through all result sets. Now, for the other operations you can do with .NET, well, if you use execute scaler, it will only get the first result set. So that could be a bit of a problem, but normally you would only use execute scalar to get a scalar value, so that should not really be a second value. So I don't think this is a big issue. Execute non-query, no problem. Although in execute non-query does not return any data, behind the scenes it will get through all the result sets and it will give you any error that occur. If you do a data adapter fill with a data set, no problem, of course, because it's filling a data set and we'll get all rows. But here's the nasty guys. A data adapter fill with a data table, it will only get the first result set. So I avoid this one. Even if you only need to fill a data table, use a data set and then just extract the data table from that one. So you don't get this nasty thing of losing all the errors. And if you're not writing client code yourself, tell this to your developers. Now, the last thing I like to talk about is how to handle nested transactions, or how to not to handle them, so to speak. And I put those in quotes because they are not really the nested transactions. So begin transaction, and that means the transaction starts. And if I do a second begin transaction, that does not start a new transaction. That just increments at a train count. And then if I do commit transaction, well, nothing is really committed. It just decrements at a train count. And if I now do commit transaction, now at the train count goes down to 0, the transaction commits. Now, what if I do a rollback transaction? Well, it doesn't matter if it happens here, here, or here. It will always roll back everything. Now let's think about nested procedure. So I was touched at this before. So we have an outer procedure that starts a transaction and it calls an inner procedure that also starts a transaction. Should the catch handler of the inner SP really roll back everything? Of course, ideally not. I mean, maybe that outer procedure wants to employ a plan B, like just log in the error somewhere or do something else. Maybe call a second procedure that behaves better. However, we are an SQL Server. We are not in Oracle. We are not in Postgres. We are not in MySQL. We are an SQL Server, and we have no other choice but rolling back everything, because SQL Server does not offer any better way. The inner procedure has failed to fulfill its contract, so it must roll back. There's no discussion about it. It cannot leave the transaction open. And we have to roll back everything. Now, someone might be thinking, wait a minute, I heard about save points. So yes, I need to talk about save points then. Okay, yeah. So begin transaction, yes, you can do this, and you can give it a name, mytran. And then you can do the first part, and then I can say save transaction my save, and perform a second part. Now I can say rollback transaction my save, and this rolls back the second part, but this first part is still there, so I can continue with the transaction and leave it open. And by the way, yes, the name of that save point could be throw. So that's why that is legal syntax. I suggested that they should actually outlaw this name, but Microsoft didn't listen. Anyway, it sounds like this could be something that is useful, which sort of ties into what I spoke about the previous slide. Save points are useless. Why? Because you cannot roll back to a save point when the transaction is doomed. You must roll back the entire transaction. And I've told you to always run with the exec abort on, so the transaction will always be doomed. And even if you don't do that, well, the transaction is rollback is only possible for some errors. So what's the point? Well, you can roll back to the save point on Wednesdays and Sundays, but not other days of the week. Of course, if you anticipate a specific error like a primary key violation, which will not doom the transaction when the exec abort is off, yeah, then you can do that. But as a general point of error handling, no. And also, if you try to do this, it makes the general pattern for error handling is just very complex. And I've seen people who always do this. They catch at the train counter starting of the procedure, etc. But that's just a lot of complexity, which easily could go wrong for something which only works sometimes. And also, keep this in mind, save points are not supported in distributed transactions. And you might say to yourself, I'm not using distributed transactions. I'm telling you, you don't know. Because someone could get the idea of calling yours to procedure from a linked server 3 years from now. And there's no way you can check that you are in the distributed transaction. I can tell you this. I've used save points maybe one or two, maybe 3 times in my career. The first time was a really odd thing. But the second time, it was exactly this. I wanted some nicer error handling. Okay, let's do a save point rollback to do some nicer behavior. Turned out that procedure was called from a distributed transaction, and it was nasty. I mean, the error message we got was just blah. I mean, it said nothing. It was just complete blah. We had to use the profiler to find out what the real problem was, and it was exactly my save point. So I think I'm already over time, but I hope you can stay a few more minutes. So I'm just going to do a quick summary about terms of aims and means while we want to do error handling. So always communicate unexpected errors. Never lose users to see that they see correct data. And the means to do that is to re-raise the error and get all result sets. Always abort execution unexpected errors. Don't go and persist incorrect data. And the means to do that is set exit mode on, if at a tracker greater than 0, roll back the transaction and re-raise the error. Prevent orphan transactions. Yes, they nasty. I've been there. Set exit mode on, if at a track count greater than 0, roll back transaction, also in the client code. And don't lose the original error message, because if you do this, troubleshooting is going to be a nightmare. I mean, so many times I was getting a very generic error message, but not understanding anything. And eventually being able to, well, using profile or something else, finding the actual error message is, yep, that's the reason. It's just 5 seconds to understand what's wrong. But until you get there. So keep things simple. Don't do fancy error handling, because the more complex your error handling is, the more risk is that you get an error bug into your error handling code, and then you're lost. And watch out for the semicolon trap. One more thing before I close this, here's a tip here from Management Studio. You can run with exec mode on by default. So if you go to Options, Query Execution, SQL Server Advanced, here's a checkbox. If you're running against production environments, you should absolutely have this, because you might do something like you're going to do script, you start transaction, and then, wait a minute, that was wrong. You press the red button. Sigh of relief, you think, go for a cup of coffee. But in fact, as a matter of fact, you have only started the mess because your transaction is still open and you're holding the locks. With exec mode on, you're reducing the risk that for a whole lot. Also, your development environment is quite good, because you might be doing something like you still procedure that do something and you get an error. Or you press the red button for something, and the transaction is left open, and you keep on doing things, maybe changing procedures, and then eventually you get an error which throws back the transaction. Then things are reverted. Then you don't understand anything, and you get very confused. Exec mode on, having that on by default, make things simpler. So that was all for me. My name is Erland Sommarskog. My email address here is sqlsommarskog.se, and again, slides and scripts on sommarskog.ec/present. And if you want to read the full story, well, 3 parts on 3 appendices, you can start here. Part 1 is actually a short one. It's only 12 pages, something like that, which just gives you the recipe how to do error handling and write catch blocks. Part 2, it's like 80 pages, and this is the one that includes all these weird things that can happen, and including a few weird things I did not cover here because they're a little more marginal, and all of these things. Part 3 is even longer. It's 100 pages, but that also because it includes quite long examples and also an implementation of this error handling that logs to a table. And then the appendixes, the first one is about linked service, which is, that one is going to take your head spinning to the next level, because that's a really confusing error with those errors. There's something about the CLR, which is also quite funny. And the last is more an extension about the implementation for error handling with Service Broker. So I hope you enjoyed this. If there are any questions, we can take this, unless you, right now, Agnes or someone else?
There is no questions that I can see in the chat so far. So guys, if you have any, then please present your questions in the chat. Or I mean, we're not that many people, you could even unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, that's all right.
Now that the presentation isn't ongoing anymore. So.
Yeah, I'll see if I can just find my Teams window.
I see people are using these applause. And, I did it myself. Woo.
Yeah. So I'm gonna put, okay, that was a oh well. Let's see, I'm also gonna move back to see this slide, and
yeah, I did post it in the chat, but I did actually type it by hand, so maybe that one I could have made a typo. So
yeah, if you type all that on your own by hand, God, you're crazy, man.
And I think we should try something. If we all load that page and then everyone vote at the exact same time, so that they get a real peak in the voting, then maybe they understand that they should implement this.
Okay.
That's the one where you ask them to implement something like option strict, right?
Yeah, that's one, isn't it? But this is the one that try catch should always work. Let's see now. See if I can redo the fine, because it's the font because I've got to white with fit funky there. And there's a dot at the end.
Yeah.
It's gonna let's see here. Now it look a little more normal. It's even clickable now, I think.
I just see a lot of thank yous and no questions.
Yeah.
But I think when I read this article or the different parts of the article, the first, second, and third time, I more like looked like a question mark myself. So, but here
Well,
is actually a question: would you explicitly set begin transaction on C# code or on t-sql code? What's the best approach?
oh, well, I would say it depends. I mean, it's quite common to do if the supersedure. Let me put it this way: if the supersedure is doing a unit of work, it should have begin transaction, commit transaction, because someone might be running that supersedure on its own. So if you know that this one has to be atomic, but then again, at the same time, the application might be doing lots of several calls that all the application thinks should be atomic. So then the application should do begin transaction or use some transaction scope thing or whatever.
Mm. Yeah, I know I've seen a lot of batch programming in C# where it makes total sense to not have any transaction handling in the C# batch because you call the stop procedure. If it fails, well, just go on with the next thing.
Yeah. Yes. I can hear something, but I'm not. I can hear that someone is speaking, but I can't hear what you say.
No, it was full of muted again, so I think it could have been a mistake. So
yeah,
that may be. Let's see if we have anything more in the chat. Nothing more right now, and I see some people started to leave as well.
Yeah. So here's the one more the link for the presentation. I can paste it directly from PowerPoint. It got a little messed up.
Yeah, and I would recommend one of the things to look for on your webpage is actually your feedback items, because I think they are really good, all of them. So it's really people, if you look at Erland's webpage, look at that section too, and see if you agree, then vote, because that's the only thing we can do basically. So.
Yeah, that's the wish list, and then I mean I don't go and blog and write about everything I found, because sometimes I might think they're trivial, but they should fix this. But the wish list is sort of things that this said strict checks on. I guess it's yeah. Let's see. That's not sorry. That's I guess that you do not advise to use name transactions either. Well, I rarely care about adding names for transactions, but then again, you can argue that it's good for clarity to do that. And also, you can argue that if you then put in a rollback and it doesn't match, maybe, or a commit, you get a bit of control of what you're doing. So I would say, I don't do this myself, but I can't say that it's wrong to do that. I just find it it doesn't give me that very much. Had it been, let's say, a compile time check, it would have been nicer. But so it's but this thing about nested transaction, I think each piece that performs a unit of work should start a transaction if they think, okay, this should either be done whole or not at all. But at the same time, you should think about, don't do this also can I recover, for example, if you're going to do a batch transaction, you have to do something for every customer. You should probably write it in such a way that you can restart if one customer fails. Because if you have a very long transaction, that causes lots of blocking. And actually, one of the examples there in my error handling article is you processing orders, and we're doing this one by one because some orders could have problems, and it's also written to be able to restart where I was and so on.
I have used I would say the times that I have used name transactions the most is when I use them with Mark, so that I know before I run this, manual fix program to update some currency values which have been wrong or some rates, then I create the name transaction with Mark, and then I just commit it immediately and have it in the log, so that I can do a restore to the point just before I started running my fix program. But
that's with Mark. It's also one of these things, right, where you need a name transaction. Just been playing with Mark, the last few days, because there's a weird thing is, if you have you begin transaction, then you do go, and then you do your update, and then you do commit. Well, then the mark may or may not be recorded in log mark history. It's very weird.
Yeah, I saw where you wrote the question actually.
Yeah, and it was in the Q&A form, and it was just.
That's weird. It is. If you find out why, then I'd be happy to hear about it.
Yeah, well, I guess that will be in the same place. It's not that I need to know, but it was just, maybe it could be construed as a bug, but I guess it has been that this way for a long time, and maybe because most of the time you would use. Well, I think we did. I know actually the system I work with, we actually used begin with mark in the application because we created the transaction with mark just before starting the nightly batch or something like that. So they could easily store to that point. So it can be an application code, but typically that it will be in the store procedure. So
yeah, that's true.
Did you notice, by the way, how many we were as most?
I think 32 was the top score or something, which is about half of the those who RSVP'd yes to the meetup. So
yeah.
I mean, which is something I just count on being half the number basically. Every time.
Yeah, but it's quite common if you, for some things like this, if you, you want to sign up, maybe I want to go and maybe I don't have the time. I was a bad boy. The other week we had the SQL user group. I signed up for this because I wanted to listen to Klaus, but then because there was an SQL day on the same day, and then they very late they said, "Oh, we're going to have a Q&A session. Do you want to join?" And I thought, yeah, maybe I should do that. It could be fun.
How was your experience with SQL Day in the end, with the presentation tool?
Oh, oh God! It was that was not very many speakers who were happy with that one. I actually came out better than most others because I had so much problem already doing the tests that I recorded my session in advance.
Okay, yeah.
But because there were some people, they did not have any problem when they tested it. Then they were going to do the presentation. Well, I think Instagram for 2 minutes, and then you just hang. And then they set up some other site so where you can share through Zoom, and that site would then forward it to Avatar Land. But that was the really bad.
What I ended up doing, I have a 49-inch screen, so I can't share the whole screen, and there was no way to share just one application in the Avatar Land thing. So I ended up connecting my computer on 2 ports to the same screen and split the screen so that I can have a primary and a secondary, and then just share, and then take down the resolution to something like 1280 by 800 on the primary one, and then I can have the secondary screen with Avatar Land up and the chat and so on. So, but it wasn't fantastic, to say the least.
So I had this fantastic using experience. The first time I tried it, I did two. I tried, as I can do now, present from a VM, but the Avatar Land took so much power that opening PowerPoint, it was just took minutes, and eventually it crashed. It was just completely dead. So then the second time, okay, I'm going to present directly from the laptop. So I started my presentation, moved on with the slides, clicked the link to open Management Studio, and I could see Management Studio in Avatar Land. But Johan and the lady from Avatar Land company, they could not.
Oh.
And then they said, no. Well, we're going to talk with the technician. No, I don't trust this application. It was just, the whole thing was just over the top. I mean, yes, I guess it's more fun to have things like that, but it should not be too complicated. Did you do the Data Platform Summit?
Yeah, I did. So that was pre-recorded, which I think made sense. So.
Yeah, but I think their website where they had, it was still a website. You didn't have to install an application, but you still was walking around like a conference center. It was sort of reasonable way.
Yeah, and I liked their setup, and it was nice. I did go in to talk to some of the sponsors because I figured that it's hard to run a conference without sponsors. So let's have a chat. And I think that experience was pretty nice too, to be able to chat with. I had a chat with Redgate and Century One, I think. So
yeah. By the way, that is a question in the chat that I'm going to answer. Yeah, Det är helt rätt. Jag är från Skåne. Helt rätt. Korrekt uppfattat. Ja. So.
What was the question?
This is for Marcus. He's asking for
You're from Skåne.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that is true. But you haven't lived there for a while, right?
No, that's right. I moved from. That was quite a few years ago. I'm actually only Scanian in the first generation. But however, kalla mig inte Stockholm. Sort of.
Yeah.
But
I think I have to revert to some paid work, unfortunately.
Yeah, I have some. Well, I have to first go to lunch, and I have some. So I'm going to complete a document before I call it the end of the week. Well, nice talking to you.
You know what's good with working with German customers? I have a day off on Monday, and you don't.
Well, then again, I'm running my own company, so if I decide to have a day off on Monday, I could have, but I'm not going to do that.
True. Yeah, I mean, it's not as fun to have public holidays where you have to pay for them yourself. You know, I realized when I started my own as well.
Yeah, that's true, but that's. Oh well.
Thank you for coming. I am going to stop the recording. I might cut out some of the chatting from it in the end. Or I don't know.
Yeah, that could be.